Hi again, everyone. It's Caleb Huron here, being more influential than Mr. Beast yet again. Today we've got a poetry review from an author by the name of Annie Hogan, and this poem is called The Whimsy and Beauty of a Transgender Odyssey. And if you'll note, there's a little note here for all of us. It says, I am currently working on a passion project of a small collection of poems. This is the title poem of the project. I am really proud of it and hope people find enjoyment with it. Awesome. Fantastic, Annie. I am quite sure I am going to find enjoyment from it because I just love looking at poems in general. And yeah, I imagine the audience will enjoy it too. So this is going to be great. There are some content warnings to be aware of. The author listed violence, trauma, prejudice, and transphobia. So please be advised that this work will, at the very least, brush against those topics. Before we get into it, I'm going to read my thing that I always read. So keep in mind, I am not a professional. I'm sorry. Keep in mind, I am not a professional reviewer. I'm just some guy on the internet who likes reading and writing. The opinions expressed in this video are only opinions. My interpretation of or reaction to the work will not be the same as everyone else's, for better or for worse. I will look for the good and the bad, but no matter what I say, don't be too hard on yourself. Just keep writing. And for those in the comments, please be respectful. Also, I'm so sorry for any mistakes or mispronunciations of names or words. If I come across a word that I don't want to say for whatever reason, I will replace it with the word blank. So, now that that's out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into the text. So the text starts here, and I assume it ends here. There's an extra page, but I think that is just kind of there on accident. So let's get into the text of the poem. We'll do one read through, and then we will take it piece by piece. So, the whimsy and beauty of a transgender odyssey. Tell me, O muse, of that ingenious transgender hero. See now how men lay blame upon us for our whimsy and beauty. We have fought endlessly for our whimsy and beauty. Yet our screams were denied. Only in our anger do we show our shadow. We only seek our meadows, the gardens of Eden, for our sorrow. The flowers only seek to bloom, to share their whimsy and beauty, to feel a breeze against our skin, calm. Yet we only taste metallic crimson. Our bodies remind all, I am an ingenious transgender hero. You view us as animals, rapid creatures dangerous to touch. You view us as inhuman, outside of your morality, outside of your world. You view it as something to be euthanized. We are cornered dogs, scared to look you in the eye, fur raised. I am a dog to you, and view myself accordingly. I will reclaim my fur. It's nature kind, I will replace myself in my own personal Troy. I will be an ingenious transgender hero, for my sake. I will wear a collar, the tag holding on to a phrase, freedom, for my odyssey. Okay, so recently I did that video called Good Poems by Bad Poets, or something like that. And I talked about that Amanda Lovelace poem about parental abuse, and I said that it was, in part, a successful poem in my opinion because it helped me understand what parental abuse is like, right? Someone who has never understood parental abuse gets a better understanding of what that looks like through Amanda Lovelace's poem. And in the same way, I do get a better idea of what it is like to be transgender through this poem. So in that sense, the poem is successful, at least in that regard. Now, there are some things I want to touch on as we go through. Like I said at the beginning, I will look for the good and the things that maybe could use some redrafting on the next go-around. But yeah, I'm excited to go through this. So, first of all, I love the title, The Whimsy and Beauty of a Transgender Odyssey. In general, I kind of like long titles, and I've talked about this before, because there's kind of less of a chance that the title will sound like really generic, right? Like, for example, how many poems are probably titled like Song, or how many poems are probably titled like Letter to Myself, or something like that, right? Just these kind of generic short titles, and, there's not necessarily anything wrong with that. There are poems who the strength of the text compensates for maybe a generic title, and I've always been bad with titles, like with titling my own poems, I mean, so I understand. Whereas a longer title, in this case, right, The Whimsy and Beauty of a Transgender Odyssey, it's very clear what this poem is going to be about, and it sounds very unique just by the title alone, right? So, great title. Really great hook for the reader. As for our first line, Tell me, O muse, of that ingenious transgender hero. Pretty decent opening line, I think. It definitely prompts the question, who is the ingenious transgender hero, right? Uh, it, when I was reading it, I was wondering, like, are we talking about like an actual hero from Greek mythology? Because, yeah, I think it's possible that there is maybe a transgender hero in myth, right? And O Muse, and then the word Odyssey, of course, make me think like Greek mythology specifically, but in theory, we could actually be talking about probably any mythology, right? So yeah, pretty successful opening line, I think. Um, what I do kind of wish this poem had dabbled in more, and I don't know, I feel kind of like a broken record saying this almost because I feel like I've said this in a lot of the videos on this channel recently. But when I read that opening line, tell me, O muse, of that ingenious transgender hero, I was kind of hoping for more scenes, more concrete scenes of this transgender hero and the heroism that they displayed and like the monsters they defeated, because we're working with like a Greek motif. You kind of can't use the word Odyssey in a poem without doing an implicit allusion to the Odyssey, right? Homer's The Odyssey. And so that makes me think we're kind of in for a poem about defeating monsters. And there's like a little bit of that. But I kind of wish that had been like more explicit. And, it doesn't have to be like literal monsters, but they can be like metaphorical monsters, right? Like the monsters that transgender people face every day, whether that's like other people or the ways in which they're marginalized that cis people like me would never even think about, never even realize, right? I think that would make the poem even stronger than what it already is personally, but that's just my 2 cents. I think I say this every time, but that's my biases coming through as an author and a reader. I really like poetry that can, dabble and show those concrete scenes, things that I've never experienced before, right? And, like I said, it can be literal things that happen to a transgender person, but it can also be more metaphorical because I think this poem is working more in metaphor as is, which is totally fine, right? But anyway, let's keep going. See now how men lay blame upon us for our whimsy and beauty. We have fought endlessly for our whimsy and beauty, yet our screams were denied. Only in our anger do we show our shadow. So I like those lines a lot. There are aspects of them that I don't love. I kind of don't love the repeated use of whimsy and beauty. Like, don't get me wrong, those are nice words, and I liked their inclusion in the title, and I like their inclusion here too. But then, like, you get them so many times that, I don't know, I almost feel like that lessens the power of them, right? Like, I like those words a lot in general, and also to describe a transgender person, right? But yeah, like, as I've said many times on this channel and probably on the main channel too, you got to be careful with repetition because it might have the opposite effect of what you actually intend, right? Now, that being said, I do like these lines uh, for phrases such as how men lay blame upon us and only in our anger do we show our shadow. It reminds me of people who say like, transgenders are shoving their agenda down our throats, which obviously is not true. But if they feel that way, it's because transgender people have to speak out in order to receive recognition, right? That's the case for all marginalized communities. If you feel like they're quote unquote shoving their agenda down your throat, it's probably because they just want basic rights, right? And so that's how I read these lines, right? And of course, how men lay blame upon us. It's like, for example, with the 2024 election, was it the 2024 election? The most recent presidential election, Democrats were very quick to throw trans people and trans policies, trans promoting policies, I guess, under the bus for losing that election. And it's like, dude, you didn't lose the election because you supported trans rights. That's such a silly take. So yeah, yes, people are very eager to blame trans people for everything that goes wrong, right? On both sides of the aisle, I should add, Democrats and Republicans, all too eager to throw trans people under the bus. Again, with the line, we have fought endlessly, it's another one of those lines where it's like, show me what that fight looks like, right? Either metaphorically or literally. And then yet our screams were denied, only in our anger do we show our shadows. I think that's a good line. I don't think it needs changing, but again, I do wish there was more detail in terms of the fight, right? The fight itself. Because like I said, this poem does help me understand the trans experience better, but you can go even deeper, right? I would even ask, like, who is the intended audience for this poem? Because if it's someone like me who already knows that, trans rights are a good thing, then I think you can go even deeper, right? Because even though even though I support trans rights, I would be very interested to know more about what it's like to be trans. And then if the audience is maybe someone who's not like me, who needs to understand why trans people are fighting for their rights, if that's the intended audience, then again, it doesn't hurt to show what a trans person goes through, because then they'll understand better. Oh, like, yeah, trans people don't have the basic rights that cis people do. They are marginalized in ways that I had never thought of before, right? I hope you can understand why I am encouraging more showing in lines such as these, right? But let's move on to our second stanza. We only seek our meadows, the gardens of Eden for our sorrow. So I like that line pretty well. Because yeah, like that's something I think about when I hear anti-trans rhetoric a lot, is like, how is this person being trans like actively hurting you or anyone else, right? What is the physical harm that that does to any other person or to the society at large, right? And so yeah, I see the truth in that line, right? Trans people only seek their meadows, like they only want to exist in peace and in harmony, right? And they could if other people weren't such bigots. Sorry, have I gotten that point across enough yet? I feel like I'm being very heavy-handed here in my support of trans people. Sorry if I'm coming off as, too ham-fisted here, but anyway. All this to say, I see the truth in these lines, and then the Garden of Eden reference is neat, but you could potentially go deeper with that, right? And I'm not going to say like it's clashing with sort of the Greek allusions that we have going on here, because it is possible to write a coherent poem with both Greek and Christian allusions, obviously. But yeah, I do kind of wish that metaphor went a little deeper, right? Like, I think about the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. There's a lot you could do with that as a trans metaphor, right? This idea of like eating the fruit and then coming to a higher plane of understanding and then being like punished and cast out for it, right? I hope you can see like how a trans person might take that story and do something really unique and interesting with it. And maybe honestly that's a topic for a separate poem, right? Um, but yeah, even in this single line, you could do like a little bit more, because the famous thing about the Garden of Eden is how Adam and Eve were cast out from it, and so you as a trans author, you could say like, we're trying to get back into the Garden of Eden, right? Or some clever wordplay that sort of connotes this idea that you're trying to undo the fall, right? And then there would be like some added irony there a little bit, because a lot of the rhetoric against trans people is religiously based, and especially like based in Christianity, right? Not like, let me clarify. Not all Christians are anti-trans, obviously, and not all trans rhetoric is rooted in Christianity, obviously. I just want to cover my bases there, right? You can obviously be a Christian and be in support of trans people, 100%. Not all Christians are bad, and not all bad people are Christians. I feel like I have to make that disclaimer, because bad faith actors are very good at misinterpreting people in general. So anyway, I just had to make that point real quick. But yeah, I do think you could just do a little bit more with this line. You don't even have to add that much, but just a little rephrasing, just a little wordplay even, and this line could take on even more meaning, right? And then, like I said, in another poem, you could explore the whole Garden of Eden thing and how that might be a metaphor for transgenderism, right? The flowers only seek to bloom, to share their whimsy and beauty. Hmm. Is there potentially a more unique metaphor you could use there? Um, it's not a bad metaphor, right? Like, it's just their nature, right? Flowers don't know how to do anything other than bloom. And yet I feel like maybe I've heard that metaphor before. So is there something else, some other product of nature, maybe some animal that doesn't get shouted out a lot in poetry, or maybe a specific flower or a specific tree. Like in the Discord server we recently did in defense of the mosquito, right? And one of the major points across most of our poems was that mosquitoes don't really know anything other than what they do, right? Like they don't know how to live without sucking human blood or, other creatures' blood for that matter. And so like how do you blame them for just adhering to their nature, right? So anyway, all that to say, this is a good metaphor, but I think you can make it even more unique, even stronger. And then again, we have to share their whimsy and beauty, and I kind of already made my point about that line. To feel breeze against our skin, calm, yet we only taste metallic crimson. That is a pretty decent line. The second half there, especially, we only taste metallic crimson, right? As if to say, we taste blood in our mouths, right? Whether from being beaten, I guess, I guess that's the major thing, right? We are literally beaten, we are literally assaulted, and we taste blood in our mouths for it, right? Um, I started to wonder, a lot of these lines, pretty much all of these lines, it looks like are end stopped. They all complete the phrase and then move on to the next line. No enjambment to be found here, which is fine if that's what you want to do with this poem. That's fair. But I do wonder, maybe on the next draft, you could add to what you already have here, what's already working here, with some really creative line breaks, right? Like, for example, we only taste line break, next line, metallic crimson. I think that would really emphasize what's already good about that phrase, right? Or let's see. Um, what would be another good example? Maybe, yeah, maybe up here, only in our anger, line break, do we show our shadow, right? So those are some options for you. But anyway, let's get back to the second stanza. Our bodies remind all, I am an ingenious transgender hero. That line, that phrase, our bodies remind all, I kind of wish there were more from that. Like, remind all of what? That gender is a social construct, or is there more to it than that, right? I'm curious, and I do kind of want something firmer there. And again, it can be metaphorical, but yeah, I'm left wondering there in a way that feels just a little bit unsatisfying. And I've talked about that a lot on the second channel too, like answering questions that risk leaving the audience unsatisfied, right? And then as for I am an ingenious transgender hero, I'll just reiterate, I do kind of wish we got something more concrete to show us that, right? As for our third stanza, you view us as animals, rapid creatures, dangerous to touch. You view us as inhuman, outside of your morality, outside of your world. You view it as something to be euthanized. Um, I don't know why we transitioned from us to it. Like, does it mean like gender theory or, transgenderism in general? Because I think us would work just as well. And like, I don't know, as far as repetition goes, it's not terrible. Like, it's got a decent rhythm to it. You view us as, right? Um, I don't know. Yeah, like, I guess my major question is just what the it is referring to. And again, that's another thing I've said a lot on this channel is you have to be careful using words like it or this or something because they do come off as too vague, too generic, right? And so it's another instance where I need more, right? Are we still talking about us or what are we talking about here, right? That being said, I do rather like these lines. Otherwise, I feel like this is where the metaphor is starting to get more interesting and even a little more unique, and especially in the next stanza. As far as the phrases themselves, I don't really know that I have anything specific to say about them. Rapid creatures dangerous to touch, outside of your morality, outside of your world. Maybe that line could, I don't know, you could rephrase that to sound a little more, or a little less on the nose, maybe, right? But then something to be euthanized, I think, is pretty good too. As for our last line, we are cornered dogs scared to look you in the eye, fur raised. That's pretty good. And we are going to get more out of that metaphor in the next stanza. But again, I almost want a little more there too, where it's like, yeah, a dog can be very scary, but as it turns out, dogs in general, when they're acting scary, they're just as scared of you as you are of them, right? And that's the case for most creatures, right? I think of bats in particular, like we find bats very scary because, we know that they bite, we know that they can cause rabies or whatever, and they swoop down, and yeah, it's frightening. It's like, and then there's the whole vampire mythos too. But in reality, bats are pretty harmless. They're so small, right? I don't think you even realize how small a bat actually is, especially like here in North America. I know there are bigger bats across the world, but yeah, they're scared of us, right? And it's funny that we're scared of them too. Anyway, I guess that's the point I want to get across is like I like this visual, um, and it works well with all this. And in a way, maybe you show how you have to bark sometimes, right? Even though you are scared, um, you're barking and you're strong, right? I don't know. Take that advice if you want to. I think the line still works well with what's already here, but yeah. Let's move on to our last stanza. Hang on one second. How are we doing on time? Okay, yeah, we should have plenty of time for this. I am a dog to you and view myself accordingly. I will reclaim my fur. Um, I think that's a little redundant. Like I think we got that already from the previous stanza, but I will reclaim my fur. That sounds pretty interesting, right? Like I was just talking to another friend about this, a friend who's in a marginalized community, and how like the abuse that they receive, right? And how, they feel like they need to reclaim it, but also they wonder if they reclaim it, like, are they feeding into the ignorance, right? And I feel like this poem captures some of that nuance where it's like trans people aren't monsters, but like if bigots are going to view them as monsters, then they will be strong and they will roar, right? Um, Now, forgive me if that's ignorance on my part. Again, I don't know what it's like to be trans. I'm a cis person. But this idea of like, if you're going to view me as a dog, then I'm going to reclaim my fur, right? I will be what you say I am, and I will be the loudest version of that possible, right? Um, yeah, I don't know. Like, there's a lot of nuance there, and that's I think is all I'm trying to say. And this line, I don't know. It's a really neat line. That's all. I hope I don't sound tone deaf or ignorant here. I really do like a lot of what's going on here. That's all. Anyway, it's nature kind. I will replace myself in my own personal Troy. So now we're back to the Greek allusions here, um, which kind of strikes me off guard. And I was going to say this later, but I might as well say it now. I do almost feel like there are two different poems inside of this one poem, right? There's all of the dog stuff, but then there's all of the mythological allusions. And you could make the dog stuff more mythological. You could say the word hellhound or something. But yeah, I kind of do feel like there are two different poems here. And so, Annie, there's a suggestion for you. Maybe try separating the two big ideas that you've got going on here, the idea of the Odyssey and all of the mythological allusions, and then the idea of you view us as animals, right? Just try it as an experiment. If you like all of it together better, then fantastic. But yeah, I'm just urging you, just try it, and maybe you'll like the two separate poems better than the one whole poem, and then and then you'll have two really great poems, right? So anyway, um, moving on to our second line of that last stanza. Oh no, we already read that. Sorry, we went back to the Greek allusion. It's nature kind. I will replace myself. That's an interesting line, and I'm not entirely sure what it means. Oh, sorry, it's not I will replace myself, it's I will place myself. Okay. Yeah, it was because the word replace was what was confusing me the most. Um, but with that now being the case, it's nature kind. That also feels just like a tiny bit redundant because up here we had the flowers only seek to bloom, right? Which kind of already implies it's nature kind. Yeah, I hope that makes sense why I would say that. The last two lines read, I will be an ingenious transgender hero for my sake. I will wear a collar, the tag holding on to a phrase, freedom for my odyssey. Sorry, I forgot that this was also a stanza. um, it's neat because it looks kind of like a signature, right? But then it's also part of the tag of the collar, and that too is an interesting visual, and it ties back into the nuance in the line, I will reclaim my fur, right? Because usually a collar is like not a sign of freedom, right? And so there's an interesting sort of, I don't know, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for. I don't like, not quite juxtaposition, not quite paradox, but subversion, I guess. There's an interesting subversion where this speaker's collar is actually a sign of their freedom, right? Freedom for my odyssey. Um, and again, I like both of these ideas, yet I can't help feeling that they are like separate ideas, that the whole collar bit should be part of a poem about being viewed as an animal, and then the Odyssey bit and the mythological bits, those should be separate, those should be part of their own poem, right? I hope you can see why that is, Annie, as I make my critiques here. But yeah, yeah, que más digo? I think that about covers it. Um, yeah, like I said, there are a lot of great things working here. I'll reiterate kind of my main points here. First, experiment with these two big ideas that you've got going on here. Experiment with them by trying to write them into two separate poems and see what you come up with in doing that. My second major piece of advice, again, a little more showing when it comes to the whole ingenious transgender hero. More building on that idea and more showing what that looks like, either in the metaphorical or in the literal sense, right? Those would be my major pieces of advice for you here with this poem, Annie. Um, yeah, and then even with the second big idea you've got going on here, the whole dog creature thing, I think there's some more showing you could do in that regard too. Again, either metaphorically or literally. Um, uh, Another thing that might benefit this poem and just all the poems in this small collection that you're working on, some personal experiences, right? Um, I don't mind when poems are metaphorical, absolutely not. Um, and yet, when it comes to being a transgender person specifically, I do think there's power in showing personal experience there, right? Yeah, I don't think I have to explain that any further. And then I think it's also really interesting when a poem can start metaphorically, but then it couches in something very real, right? And not every poem has to be that way, obviously. There are a lot of great poems that are just purely metaphor and they work spectacularly. And then there are a lot of poems that are purely just like real lived experience, and those also work spectacularly, right? And then there are poems that combine the two, and those also work spectacularly. So let each poem kind of tell you what it wants to be, right? Let each poem tell you its shape and where it starts and where it ends and the journey that it takes to get to the end, right? So I hope any of this was helpful for you, Annie. And like I said, I hope none of my commentary or critique here sounded too ignorant or, yeah, off base or unhelpful. Yeah. So I think we can leave it there. Once again, this was The Whimsy and Beauty of a Transgender Odyssey by Annie Hogan. Annie, thank you again for submitting this. Keep writing. Yeah. Viewer, thank you for watching. And ultimately, we'll leave it there. Keep in mind, this is a rough draft.